So, there's a little island that's about 5 miles in length, and at most it's 2.5 miles in width, but as short as about 800 yards in width. And supposedly it was the site of a big battle in World War II. It has been said, but I say unto you, it has been said that there was a terrible battle on Jima in World War II. But I say unto you, nothing happened on Iwo Jima except for some filming in the Pacific theater of war. Now, if you don't get that by now, try to get it. It's a theater. And they want to invite you to sit back in your movie theater chair and witness a movie. So we're going to join a hoaxer, liar, and I'm going to sort of break down his so-called testimony as he tells us about how terrible things were on Iwo Jima.
This week on Veterans Chronicles is Don Mates, a veteran of World War II. He served in the 3rd Division of the U.S. Marine Corps and is a veteran of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Don, thank you very much for your time with us today.
Glad to be here.
Let's start, obviously, at the very beginning. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, February 10, 1926. Calvin Coolidge was president.
And did your family have a history of military service of any kind?
No. But when I had 2 brothers that served, one in the Navy and one in the Air Force, and of course I served in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II. They were younger than me, and they served after in the Korean and Vietnam.
And were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Why did you choose the Marine Corps?
Now, you said he had brothers that were younger than him and served in Korea? In Vietnam? Come on. He's a hoaxer.
1943, a recruiter came to John Hay High School in Cleveland, Ohio, and he said, "You're 17 years old, you're going to turn 18, they're going to draft you. Why don't you enlist in the Marines? We'll let you graduate from high school, and you can pick what job you wanted in the Marine Corps." And I said that I'd consider it, and my parents had to sign, and they signed. And he told me that, and he asked me before I signed what I would like to do in the Marines. And I asked him I'd like to first get the dress blue uniform. And he told me that they only issued the dress blue uniform to seagoing Marines, band members, Marine Corps band, the drum and bugle corps, and to embassy guards. And I told him that I got seasick and that I didn't play an instrument. Could I be an embassy guard? And he says, well, he said, you're 6'2", you're in shape. He said, I'll put that down as your first choice. And he said to me, where would you like to serve? And I said, well, I knew that Portugal was neutral, and I knew they had 2 colonies. One was Goa in India, and one was Macau in China. And Macau interested me because of the gambling. and the nightlife that went with it. And he says, well, then I'll put down Macau as your first choice, and Portugal is the second choice. Well, I want to tell you, to this day, I'm looking for that recruiter. That's how I joined the Marines. I joined it for the uniform, which I never did get till the end of the war.
Did you ever get to Macau?
Never got. I haven't been there yet.
So
that's how I ended up in the Marines.
where did you do your...
So look at the smile. It's duping delight. It's not about I never got to Macau. It's the duping delight of this hoaxer. Now, I'm not entirely sure, so I admit to my viewers that I'm guessing, but I think that we're actually looking at Jimmy Durante. If you paid attention to some of my other videos, and I identified Jimmy Durante as the one who played Harry Truman. You can look that video up on Who is Who in Hoaxology. But this individual has such a striking resemblance to Durante that I'm going to say I'm pretty sure you're looking at a very old Jimmy Durante. And remember, he played the role of Harry Truman. So all this mumbo jumbo about Iwo Jima is nothing for an old veteran actor like Jimmy Durante. Now, as this proceeds on, he's going to employ a lot of things about newspapers and even movies and things like that that will tell you he's not your average Marine. It's another reason why I think it's Jimmy Durante.
Because I did my boot camp training in Paris Island, and from Paris Island, because it helped that I was an Eagle Scout, and they assigned me to a very high-sounding job, and it was a combat intelligence school. And basically, combat intelligence school is nothing but a scout and observer. And that lasted 8 weeks. And they taught you how to operate a 560 radio. They taught you demolitions. They taught you map reading. And they taught you a little Japanese, which was useless. The nighttime patrolling, which actually, when it was in combat, we did do that. Rubber boat reconnaissance, which we never did. The frogmen in the Navy did that. And that's where I was trained. We also were taught how to operate a 50 caliber and 25 caliber machine gun, a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, and of course the M1 rifle, which every Marine had, even the cooks and bakers.
Was there any particular part of that that you found the most interesting or hoped you would be doing when you were deployed?
Well, I was really brainwashed during World War II by the movies, by the newspapers, the radio, magazines, posters, and I really believe...
He's telling you the truth. The public was brainwashed. It was all theater. Pacific theater. European theater. Look at the nose. I'm pretty sure you're looking at Jimmy Durante.
The Japanese were super evil, and we were super good. And that I was just
They bombed Pearl Harbor, right?
I don't want to say snowed, but I was just
No, it's another fake
psychologically
out, Pearl
affected,
Harbor.
never dreaming what I was getting into. It was the propaganda that got to me, and I was just looking forward to being a...
See? Propaganda. He's telling you the truth. Everything was propaganda. On both sides.
Marine and going into combat, never dreaming that anything could happen.
So after training, how much of a time span was there between that and being deployed?
Well, after training, it was, I immediately went overseas, but even going overseas, I left Norfolk on the ship called the Florence Nightingale, and we were going through the Panama Canal, but our first stop was in Cuba, where we got liberty. And Cuba was quite a place for liberty in the 1940s. And then we stopped in Panama, got liberty in Panama, and then I went to a replacement depot in Hawaii, and I thought, my God.
He got his geography wrong and stuff. Think about what he said about first stop was Cuba. He's in the Panama Canal. Come on now. He's just making stuff up.
This is just a marvelous, exactly what I expected, and it wasn't a celebrity cruise, but it was the Navy treated you royally. You could sleep on deck, and you could eat anytime you wanted or have coffee anytime you wanted. All you had to do was stand in line. So it was just up until that point it was marvelous, and it got even better when they sent me to Guam, which was being liberated by the 3rd Marine Division. They sent me with 3 other replacements, and we went by aircraft carrier, and that's like a cruise. I mean, even had an ice cream bar there, everything but a nightclub on the ship, and that was an 8-day short-term cruise, and then the proverbial hit the fan when I landed at Guam. Then I knew that it wasn't like the movies.
And where are we on the calendar at this point?
We're into they invaded in July, and July 24th is the decoration, is their, they celebrate July 24th as the day that we invaded, and the Japanese lost control, and their July 24th is our July 4th. And I hit about July 28th, and I was immediately sent to the reconnaissance company that I had trained for, and we were sent not into the lines, we were sent to the northern end of the island, and the big fighting was in the southern end of the island. We were sent to Retidian Point, and that's where we did our fighting, and that's where we went into our combat. That's where we set up booby traps and ambushes, and as they were being driven north, we were up there waiting for them as they came up from the south, the Japanese, and it wasn't a pretty picture.
What type of action were you witnessing?
It was mostly patrolling, and at that point they hadn't been that far north, the Japanese, but you still had to be aware of booby traps, and you had to be aware of mines, and as the Japanese fled north, there was no taking prisoners on either side. It was kill or be killed, and we got into some firefights. We got into a lot of grenade throwing. We didn't have any heavy artillery, but we had
Okay, there it was, people. You've been waiting. There's your first big sign of the Pinocchio. And they do this. They touch their nose. Indicative of Pinocchio.
It was mostly patrolling. And at that
Liar.
point, they hadn't been that far north, the Japanese, but you still had to be aware of booby traps, and you had to be aware of mines. And as the Japanese fled north, there was no taking prisoners on either side. It was kill or be killed. And we got into some firefights. We got into a lot of grenade throwing.
Grenade throwing.
We didn't have any heavy artillery, but we had...
Your nose is growing, Durante.
And 50 millimeter machine guns. The only good point about Retidian Point was the rations were K rations and C rations were nothing to write home about. But what we did was we would throw grenades into the ocean.
Well, see, you said the only good point.
And then we'd take the...
throw grenades into the ocean. And the fish float up.
Go out and get the fish. And we'd eat either fresh fish, raw, and we ate anything that came up except if it had spikes on it, that was poisonous. Or we'd have a fish fry.
Fish fry?
That was the only pleasurable part about
throwing grenades
at Indian Point. Was we could,
in the water.
We could break loose a little bit.
Just about a minute left before we take our first break. How difficult was it to adjust to combat? You had obviously gone through a lot of training, but when you hit the real thing...
The real thing.
You realize it's not like the movies.
Not like the movies. He knows because he's been in a lot of movies. It's Durante.
It's the old story where there were 100 of us there, and if they asked for 98 volunteers, and they asked for 100 volunteers, and they told that only 2 of you were coming back, and there were 98 casualties. When you looked around to see who the other lucky fellow was, you never dreamed, or you never dreamt that anything would happen to you. So when something happened to one of your buddies, it comes as a shock, and it's you become anxious, you become stressed, and it's there's a smell. There's a couple smells that you don't get over, and that's the smell of fresh blood coming out of somebody. If somebody's artery is cut and the blood gushes out, there's nothing you can do about it. That odor of sweet blood stays with you, and the other odor is that of a decaying body. We never buried the Japanese, and their bodies just decayed. Even to this day, if I drive by a cemetery and if they're using recycled water, I think I can smell the dead bodies. Those are two smells you never get over with.
You never buried the bodies, never did anything with them. Let them stick around.
About your service in World War II in the Pacific, and specifically Iwo Jima. We're talking with Don Mates, veteran of the 3rd Infantry Division of the U.S. Marine Corps, veteran of Iwo Jima. This is Veterans Chronicles. Our guest on Veterans Chronicles this week is Don Mates. He's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II, veteran of Guam, as we heard in the last segment, as well as Iwo Jima, which we'll get to shortly. Don, you were just talking about your service on Guam and some of the memories and even the sense that will stay with you for the rest of your life. At this point, how much bonding had you done with your group, and at this point had you met Jimmy Trimble, who we'll talk about a lot more as time goes on?
Well, Jimmy Trimble and I met in the States, and the bonding that goes on in the Marine Corps stays with you till the to the day you die. I volunteer at a VA hospital in Florida, in West Palm Beach. And if I see a Marine standing in line waiting, I'll pull him out of line and get him to his appointment immediately. I am the commander of the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and I make a special effort. Not that I don't help as many people as I can, but I make a special effort with the Marines. And it's true, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And Jimmy and I became close, very close, because one, we were tent mates after Guam was secure, and two, he was a Major League Baseball pitcher. He had signed with the Washington Senators, and in 1943, Clark Griffith gave him a $5,000 signing bonus and sent him to Duke and paid for his college. He didn't send him to a farm team. He would play for the Duke baseball team. Well, Jimmy kept the $5,000, went to Duke for about a week, and then enlisted in the Marines. And Jimmy and I went through combat intelligence school together. We went overseas together. We were the best of buddies. We were tent mates. And because he was an outstanding pitcher, and our commanding general, Erskine Graves, was a baseball nut. And we had 6 Marine divisions.
Graves, a general
the Pacific.
called Graves.
And among the 6 divisions, there was a round-robin World Series. And General Graves wanted to win that World Series. And lo and behold, General Graves when Jimmy pitched the winning game and we won the Marine Corps World Series, he became a favorite of the general. And the general said to him, "I want you to be my bodyguard." And he says, "Pick whoever you want." And of course, Jimmy picked me. So I just tagged along and got some of Jimmy's glory rubbed off on me. And we became bodyguards for General Erskine, which just meant when he was in his tent sleeping, we were outside. When he was
Isn't
in the
that
seat,
something?
when he was awake, we were awake. When he
All of a
he was
sudden
asleep,
now,
we took turns
he's a
sleeping.
bodyguard for General Graves.
So that's how I ended up with Trimble. And being my fast buddy and also my combat buddy, you team up in a foxhole. Yeah, and Trimble was in the foxhole with me.
We're right about at the time that we record this, but the 70th anniversary of the start of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Where were you and what did you do between Guam and February of 1945 when you went to Iwo Jima?
Well, the first thing we did was we trained, but because of the job that I had, I didn't have to do any practice landings. The most I had to do was
So let's talk a little bit about the so-called Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, there was supposedly about 20,000 Japanese, 21,000. Now, why in the world would you put 21,000 soldiers on an island about 5 miles long and possibly 800 yards wide? Use the old expression, they're sitting ducks. So it makes no sense. None. And the other thing you need to know is that basically, sorry about that. Well, I had one here I wanted you to see, and that is basically what it said, I can't find it right at the moment, so I'm sorry about that. But what it said was that the Japanese drove off the entire civilian population. Now, here's what I say unto you. That's what they say unto you. There was nobody there. That's why it was a bloody battle. Because there was nobody there. It was an ideal place for filming. An ideal place for a make-believe battle. And some fantasies about raising a flag on Mount Suribachi. One of the most famous and sacred things. Raising a flag. Even if you understand the story, supposedly they relived it and redid it. And they gave a bigger flag. What's the truth? It was all a film. It was a place to shoot a movie. On a little island where nobody goes, nobody lives. And so you have a pretend battle. Well, anyhow, back to Jimmy Durante. It gets better. I realize maybe some people at this point aren't even watching because the video is very lengthy. And that's okay.
For stray Japanese. And the 3rd Reconnaissance Company consisted of 4 platoons. And one platoon, the 4th platoon, was spun off, even though it was part of the Reconnaissance Company, and was assigned to General Graves. General Graves didn't want information coming up through the chain of command. When he wanted to know something, whether it was on the island of Guam or about a patrol, he wanted a first-hand report from the participants. So our platoon was assigned to him specifically. We were at his beck and call. What the Swiss Guard is to the Pope, we were to General Graves. So we didn't participate in all the rugged training that the other troops did. We were in shape, but we had it pretty easy because of our position.
By the time the Battle of Iwo Jima started, obviously the Allies were doing very, very well in the Pacific. Did you have a pretty good sense of that, where you were, that the tide of the war in the Pacific was clearly in your favor?
Yeah, well, of course, we were taking island after island, and we were basic.
So let's talk about that strategy called island hopping. Basically, they went from one spot where there was nothing to another spot where there was nothing, and had pretend battles and doped up the locals, gave them some liquor and cigarettes to shut their mouth because it was all filming. And we're told it was a magnificent strategy to island hop. To go to a place where there's nobody and nothing, and then do some filming. Anyhow, back to Jimmy Durante. If you've hung in there with me this far, you deserve a World War II medal.
Casualties on the Japanese. And to be truthful, I personally didn't have the big picture. I had no idea that MacArthur was
picture in
going
a
to
movie
swing to the
theater.
east and come up through the Philippines, and that was where he was headed, and then we were to go to the west and do island hopping. Napoleon once said that the soldier in his army,
By the way, incidentally, P.S., the first Napoleon was Sir Robert Peel of England. The Bobbies! Sir Robert Peel played Napoleon. Oh, I know, you think Napoleon was going all over the place, conquering people. No, Napoleon was building tourist attractions like the pyramids in Egypt land.
the big picture was the pack on the back of the soldier in front of him. And that's sort of covered my view of World War II. I didn't really have a big picture. All I knew was what my job was and what I knew was going on, where I was at. I had no idea of the stepping stones and that Okinawa would be next and that they were planning to invade Japan and that Peleliu and Taro were taken because of the airfields and none of that came through to me. I found out about Iwo Jima and Guam after I got out and I read all about it. I found out what I was involved in. But when you're a private pushing to become a PFC, making $30 a month, you're just concerned where your next meal's coming from, what it's going to be, and who's the unfortunate fellow that's going to get shot instead of you.
Don, we'll pause right there. When we come back, our final segment, and we'll learn all about your role in the Battle of Iwo Jima right after this on Veterans Chronicles.
Hang in there with me.
I'm Greg Columbus. This is Veterans Chronicles. We're honored to be joined today in studio by Don
It gets
Mates,
really
veteran
good
of World
now.
War II, veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. Sir, just before the break, we were leading right up to the beginning of the Battle of Iwo Jima, which began on February 19th. You went ashore on the 24th. What was the state of the battle at that point, and describe coming ashore?
Nothing.
Well,
There was nobody there.
first we were sent
Nothing
ashore
happening.
to
There was a lot of
set up
filming,
sleeping quarters
a lot of
and a
pretending,
CP for General Erskine.
and I'm an actor.
And when we landed on the beach, it was just absolute chaos. I thought I had seen quite a bit in Guam, but this came as a shock. They hadn't yet started to bury any of the bodies. They were bloated, there were maggots, there were parts of bodies, there were people, Marines that had no head, missing legs, there was broken equipment, there was wounded lined up on the beach like railway ties. It was just utter chaos, and it seemed like the one with the loudest voice was the one that was in command. We set up Erskine, and again, as this bodyguard, we were Trimble and I, and the Japanese had spigot mortars.
Okay, I gotta show you that.
And a spigot mortar.
Gonna show you that. How goofy it is. Whoop. Hold on, I'll get there. This is what he's talking about. These specialized bombs. It's fake. Look at it. Look at the smile on his face. He knows it's a prop for a film. Now that's what he's talking about. These little rockets. Japanese are shooting them. And he's going to say some really stupid stuff.
Bigger than a 55-gallon oil drum. It's just loaded with explosives. It's rocket propelled, and it tumbles. After the rocket burns out, it reminds you of reminded me of the Roadrunner in cartoons.
That's right, because it is a cartoon. The Roadrunner in cartoons. This big bomb is going to explode and kill everybody. Come on.
You may see it occasionally now on TV, the kids may, where the Roadrunner looks up and a piano is going to fall on him and then crushes him, or a truck runs him over and he's flattened out. Well, that's how you felt when you saw this tumbling 55-gallon oil drum coming towards you. It blew a tremendous hole in the ground, and there wasn't much shrapnel, but the concussion was horrible. And if you were close enough, you'd bleed from the ears, you'd bleed from the nose. Your brain really got rattled.
Your brain got razzled.
Landed near Erskine. And he, up until that point, the recon company had not been, you could get shot anywhere on Iwo. It was 2x4.
Did you notice the disconnect in the sentences?
There were 21,000 of them. So
he jumps from one goofy thought to another.
Anywhere and you hit something. In fact, when we got ashore,
not clear, because it's all made up.
I threw a phosphorus grenade into a spider hole, or spider trap, and Trimble yelled to me, he says, "Look behind you." And the smoke from the phosphorus grenade came out behind me. And they had 17 miles of tunnels throughout. And
okay, so there's smoke coming out of this thing, right? Behind his ear or something. And now all of a sudden he jumps into this 17 miles of tunnel. Notice the disconnect. It's because he's making it all up. It's mumbo jumbo.
Everywhere. They figured the battle would last 3 days, and of course it lasted from February 19th till March 27th. Anyway, Erskine wanted to find out where these spigot mortars were coming from. They were coming night and day. And
okay, what is the size of the island? It is so tiny that most likely, if anything was launched in the air, you could tell me where it was launched from. Now he's going to go on, they don't know where these things are coming from. And remember, it's so tiny. There's your dimensions of it, right? But yet they don't know where these things are coming from. Come on. Whoop, sorry about that. So they don't know where they're coming from. And they're on a tiny piece of ground. All you have to do is use your eyes and use some binoculars and you can tell where something's coming from. If it's as big as what he says it is, an oil drum, 55-gallon drum, come on.
And he said that you could see him better at night. So he asked for our lieutenant, Stack, and our company commander, Oscar Selgo, Lieutenant John Stack. He asked for 8 volunteers, and I'll never forget him. There was Warren Garrett. He was the old man of the outfit. He was 24, had 2 children. There was Trimble, there was me, there was Corporal Reed, he was in charge of patrol. There was McCluskey, never did find his body.
Now wait a minute, come on, hold on. Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. How can it be that they're on this little tiny place? Right there. Little tiny place, and they can't find his body. Come on. Come on, people. Come on. How can you lose a body on Iwo Jima? You lose it because he lost his train of thought and he's devoid of logic, just making mumbo jumbo up.
Jim White, and there was Lee Blanchard. Lee Blanchard stayed in the Marines and became a colonel. We set out on February 28th to look for these spigot mortars and see where they were coming from. And then we had a radio with us. McCluskey was the radio man, and we strung the wire.
So there's 21,000 Japanese on that little itty-bitty island. They can't tell where these 55-gallon drums are coming from, and they set out. How can they set out? There's no room for anybody. You stand up, if there's 21,000 Japanese, you're going to be shot and killed just for standing up. Don't you see? It was just a deserted piece of ground that they used for filming and gave you a flag on Mount Suribachi and told you a bunch of nonsense. And I know someone like me will be written off as crazy. Well, let's get back to Jimmy Durante.
To a ridge between, there were 2 hills, 362 and 382. And, excuse me. And there was a ridge line. We went to the top, to the ridge line, and it overlooked an open mine sulfur pit. And when a shell would come and land in the sulfur pit, it would ignite the sulfur. It was a big open pit, and off to the right was the village of Moriyama, where the civilians had lived. And I don't know how they did it, but they raised pineapples in Iwo Jima in the volcanic ashes.
There's no pineapples on Iwo Jima. It's just nonsense.
Unbelievable. And
Unbelievable,
we
right.
set up on the top. We set up around 6 o'clock in the evening. We set up two men on the top of the ridge with the radio. Then we dropped down 50 feet. On top was Reed and McCluskey. Next came Netzel and Warren Garrett. Then came Trimble and me. And down at the bottom was Jim White and Lee Blanchard. Well, at midnight we were to shift every 6 hours. And there was always to be one man awake and one man asleep. Well, nobody ever did go to sleep, because just before we were to switch, the Japanese started to infiltrate and come up the ridge. Now, years ago they made a movie, a Sherlock Holmes movie. It was called The Hound of Baskervilles. And
see, he seems pretty knowledgeable of movies, doesn't he? And he should be, because he acted in a lot of them. It's Jimmy Durante.
I think they remade it with Robert Downey on some series in BBC. But
Pretty knowledgeable.
The story was on the moors in Scotland, this fog would come up at night, and there was a huge hound that was in this fog, and he would come bounding out and kill people. Sherlock Holmes was called in to solve the problem. Anyway, that's how I felt on Hill 362 and on the Ridge in 382. I was waiting for this hound to come bounding out of the sulfur fumes. But
isn't it something that a Marine is thinking in terms of film when he's in combat? Interesting, isn't it? He's recalling a Sherlock Holmes movie.
Out of the sulfur fumes were the Japanese who were coming at us. Now, mind you, there were 8 of us, and behind us, and we were in front of a mortar platoon. So
I hope you caught that. He went to his big nose again.
And I think they remade it with Robert Downey on some series in BBC. But the story was on the moors in Scotland, this fog would come up at night, and there was a huge hound that was in this fog, and he would come bounding out and kill people. Sherlock
Coming
Holmes
up out of the land or the sea in Revelation.
Anyway, that's how I felt on Hill 362 and on the Ridge in 382. I was waiting for this hound to come bounding out of the sulfur fumes.
Sulfur
what
fumes,
came out
that's
of the
hell.
sulfur fumes were the Japanese.
He knows the devil's real.
Now, mind you, there were 8 of us, and behind us, and we were in front of a mortar platoon. So we were right there in the front line.
Pinocchio.
And the Japanese had something that a few of us have seen on Iwo Jima. Not all outfits had it.
This is really, really good. You know, something the Japanese had, the Americans didn't have.
The back of their neck, they had a little pen, phosphorus pen. And with just a little moonlight or starlight, their officer could see his men and how they moved. We couldn't see the pin because it was on the back of their neck. But what happened was, at one point, a little bit after midnight, we turned around. And if you turned around and looked, and you saw the pins, then we knew we were in big trouble. And the battle lasted about, hand-to-hand combat, about 3 hours. And thank God we had grenades the way we...
So you're in hand-to-hand combat, but you thank God for grenades. Now I want you to think about that. I want you to think about it. Somebody's within 2 feet of you. That's called hand-to-hand combat. And then he talks about grenades. So what are you going to do? Pull a grenade pin and blow yourself up with the Japanese soldier? You see how it's all disconnected, illogical, and a bunch of nonsense.
But what happened was, as I said, Reed, he was married. He had been stationed
Come on, tell me about the grenades.
Virgin Islands. He was bayoneted. McCluskey, they never found his body.
Never found his body? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. How can you never find a body on an island that's 5 miles long, maybe 2 miles wide, and sometimes only 100 yards wide? Or 800 yards, excuse me. How can you not find a body? Are you listening? Do you want logic? Do you want reason? Or do you want emotion? That's how the hoax lie system functions. Under emotion. To get you emotionally involved in these nonsense stories so you don't have logic in your mind. Hand-to-hand combat. I'm glad we had grenades. And then he jumps into something else. They didn't find his body. How could they not find it? Where could it go? He said he couldn't even bury the bodies because it's volcanic ash. Not volcanic ash. Volcanoes don't exist.
Garrett, for some reason, the Japanese bayoneted him, and they took his rifle and left their rifle.
So now let's imagine you're a Japanese. You've decided to bayonet an American soldier. You just bayoneted him. You just saw the blood come out. And you look and you say, "Oh, that's a nice rifle, that M1. I think I'll change my rifle for it." Never mind the fact that your ammunition doesn't fit the M1. So does that make any sense to you? If you're an enemy soldier, that you can't wait to exchange your rifle? And you don't have the brains to know your ammunition will not fit the M1?
Symbolic. Trimble and I did the best we could to hold them off. And as I said, the grenades came in handy. And there was no talking. There was just script.
The grenades came in handy, especially when there was hand-to-hand combat. Because you just pulled the pin and blew everything up in sight, including yourself.
Screaming and hollering and pointing out. And at one point, a little after midnight, a little after 2 o'clock, Jimmy Trimble hollered, "Grenades." Now the Japanese grenades didn't have a pin and a fly handle like we did. Their grenades, which were much smaller than ours and much weaker, some at the end of the war in Okinawa and parts of Iwo Jima were made out of course there was the iron, then there was the ones they made out of glass, and then they had them even made out of clay, like pottery, because they were running out of minerals. And anyway.
So you make a grenade out of clay. Boy, that's one you really want to stay away from, right? A clay grenade.
And what they would do is to ignite them, they would hit them together. And when you heard that click, you know grenades were coming. I didn't hear the click, but Trimble did, and he hollered.
So if you clap two things together to ignite both, and you have one in your right hand and one in your left, and let's assume you're right-handed and your left hand is fumbly, what are you going to do? Logic out the window.
Before that, they got close enough to bayonet him in the shoulder. And coming at me was another Japanese soldier. He was crawling, and he had in his hand what I thought was a stick of dynamite or plastique. It was oblong and dark, and he was crawling towards me. Well, anyway, the Trimble's wound wasn't that bad, and he kept firing, and I shot and blew away the Japanese who got within a couple feet of me. And I just reached over and grabbed what he had in his hand.
So the Japanese soldier is so dumb, he's crawling, and he's just a couple of feet away from this American soldier? Does that make any sense? That the Japanese soldier is that stupid? To be in a crawling position and he's only 3 or 4 feet away from this American soldier?
The wooden box and I stuck it in my pocket. Well, anyway, grenades came flying in right near the foxhole, and one came in the foxhole and it peppered Jimmy's back. It broke both of my legs and came very close to, when I looked down, my crotch was just a bloody mess. And I pulled myself out of the hole. Trimble, he was still alive, and I reached in to help pull him out. And
so both of his legs are broken, but yet he pulls himself out of a hole, and then he reaches in to help this other guy. Do you have logic right at the moment, or are you wrapped up in emotion?
And at the same time, the Japanese had looked like a baseball base. It was made out of canvas. It was about the same size as a baseball base, maybe 15 inches square. And in each corner was a magnet, and it was loaded with explosive. And they would put that on a tank and try to blow the tank. Well, this soldier had this strapped to his body, and he climbed in the hole. Of course, I saw what he had on. I rolled away. He pulled the cord. The mine went, they called it Mine 90. Grenade 90, the Japanese did. And the Japanese just evaporated. And Trimble was, he was blown in half.
So the Japanese evaporated. Wasn't blown to pieces, he evaporated. Now meanwhile he was in the hole, but obviously he didn't evaporate. And his body is blown in half because a Japanese man couldn't wait to blow himself up in a hole. But he actually didn't blow himself up, he evaporated himself up. Evaporated milk! And let's go to the atomic bomb in Hiroshima that evaporated human bodies and left impressions in rocks. Atomic bomb doesn't exist either. Use your head.
Part of his body just separated completely. I was very fortunate that
you sure
two
were.
behind me, White and Blanchard, they came out of their hole. Blanchard picked me up, carried me back. White put on the tourniquets. He took my belt, took his belt, and he did something that he wasn't supposed to do. He took his bandages and did both my legs with my bandage and his bandages and put on sulfa drugs. And by this time it got to be about 4:30, and a corpsman came along and gave me a shot of morphine.
So he has both of his legs broken, a Japanese soldier evaporated in front of him, and he decides to look at his watch. It's about 4:30. You know how you look at the watch or the clock at work? Or you look at the watch or the clock in a boring video, maybe like this one? Glad he was keeping time for his records. He could put it on his timesheet when he turned it into the military.
Understand to this day how somebody becomes a heroin addict, because that morphine, even though I was banged up pretty good, that morphine just spreads a warm feeling over you, and you just completely relax, and the pain goes away. It's just marvelous. And they put a mark on your head, like they do for Catholics on Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. So they put a mark on your head so they know that you had a morphine shot and you don't get too many of them. Anyway, Corman gave me some plasma, and they carried me away.
also going to put a mark on your forehead later called the mark of the beast. These people are close to the beasts. They know the beasts because they're liars and they serve the father of lies.
What they would call on TV a MASH unit, a medical unit, where they bandaged me up and tried to set my legs, but it was just too much. And they shipped me. I was there 24 hours, and they shipped me down to the shore. They put me, the hospital ships were all crowded, and they put me on a troop ship, put me in the kitchen, and that's where they operated on me, and bound me up. And that's where I got a shot of penicillin. It turned out that I'm allergic to penicillin. I wear the medallion, and every time I go in the hospital, I put big signs all over, allergic to penicillin, because I went into a coma for 10 or 11 days, and your blood pressure drops down to nothing, and your skin just peels right off. And I woke up on Saipan in an army hospital in a tent. From there, they flew me to Johnson Island, where Amelia Earhart is supposed to be. And then from Johnson Island, they flew me to Hawaii.
P.S. There's no Amelia Earhart. That was just none other than Lindbergh, dressed as a woman.
And by this time, it was April 1st. And,
April Fools.
That was, I remember that. It was Easter Sunday. And it also was the day that they invaded Okinawa. The hospital was so crowded in Hawaii that they put me in the VD ward. And because it was Sunday, everybody from that ward was mobile. They either went to the movies, went to eat, went for a walk. I was there alone. And they said that a congressman was coming through. Well, under normal conditions, as a 17 or 18-year-old, I wouldn't have any idea who my congressman was. But I remember in newsreels that Franklin Roosevelt, who was in a wheelchair, every time he came to address Congress, he would stop and talk to a congressman who was in a wheelchair. And that's how his name was Crosley. And that was my congressman. And that's how I knew when I saw the congressman that it was Congressman Crosley. And he came over and he said, how would you like to go? Asked me where I was, and I told him, you're my congressman, I'm from Cleveland, East Side. He said, how would you like to go home? And I said, sure. He says, would you like to go today? I said, I sure would. Well, I didn't go that day. I went the next day. And I was on the first plane that flew from, that had evil casualties on it, and flew into Oakland Naval Hospital.
So your congressman is your big hero, right? No, they're actors too, because it's all phony. Phony Congress, phony Senate, phony presidents, phony government. It's all been phony. Pretty much from day one, but actually the moral turning point would be the third in 33, or March the 9th, 1933, when anything you ever knew of Valley government collapsed and U.S. went into total bankruptcy. And ever since then, it's just been pretend. Yes, we've been under military rule since 1933, people.
From there I went to Sun Valley Rehab. From there I went to Great Lakes. From there I went to the Marine Hospital in Cleveland. There's no such thing as a U.S. Marine Hospital. This was a Merchant Marine Hospital. And I recuperated there, and life went on after that.
You had several more surgeries, from what I understand.
My last operation ended in 1982, and two women operated on me. And what saved me was that's when the CAT scan came out. Before that, when they would operate for shrapnel, they would poke you, and then they would glue a paper clip to where they thought the shrapnel, but they didn't know how deep it was. And you know how a CAT scan works. It's one X-ray after another, and they can 3D it, and they were able to spot what was really troubling me and take out the pieces that were embedded and weren't moving. And I haven't been back. Haven't had an operation since. They're little pieces of volcanic ash that come out, but it's just like a pimple. With my fingernail, I can flick it out. And I did have braces. I got rid of them one by.
So what came out of him? Volcanic ash? Volcanic ash comes out of him? Can't you be consistent? It should have been hunks of metal come out of him like a pimple.
And that, unfortunately,
Touching the nose.
I did get some gangrene infection that held me up for a while. And back in 1945 and 1946, you got to remember, therapy was bed rest. If they could get you in a whirlpool bath, and they would give you a back rub with Jergens lotion. That was it. There was no getting out of bed right after the operation. There was no moving after the cast came off. It was all bed rest. So it took me a little while to get organized.
Last question here in our last minute or so, maybe 2 minutes. Since that time, you've also been very active in honoring the memory of Jimmy Trimble, both at the American Veterans Center and elsewhere. Talk about how you took on that role and what it means to you.
Well, with the American Veterans Center and with the...
Now that's another hint that it's Jimmy Durante, Jimmy Trimble, Jimmy. They like to give little hints.
St. Albans, where he went to prep school, we started a scholarship, and the last count that we had raised was $250,000, and it's for I hope a Marine, but they'll take any son of a service.
Now once again, they do a lot of hoax fundraising and collect huge sums of money. And basically, they get extremely wealthy out of their nonsense stories.
Then we also instigated the Young Marine Award, every year an annual award that I donate to. And the American Veterans Center and I, they send the outstanding women Young Marine and men Young Marine. Now, this is not the real Marines, these are like the Boy Scout Marines.
Right.
And they're honored at the banquet. And at the American Veterans Center, it holds every year. And I just continue in tribute. I'm the head of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. I have the
that should be another clue to you as well, handing out the Purple Heart for lives about wars that are not exactly what you think they are.
West Palm Beach, Florida. I have the second largest. We have 414 members, and the biggest award I ever got, beside a Purple Heart, was 2009. I received from the Pentagon the World War II Service and Community Service Award. Bob Feller got one, I got one, and star, Hugh O'Brien.
Notice, he's right up there with Bob Feller and a movie star. It's Jimmy Durante.
Got one too. And I'm here today, 89 years old, and feel like $1 million.
Well, you look great, and your story is incredible. Thank you. I know it's been a long...
So I would like to thank you for watching this. I know it's been a lengthy video. I didn't make it short because I was enjoying making it. And if you did get to the end of it, I do want to thank you. Anybody who bailed out quickly, I understand. I understand completely. But basically, you're looking at, or we're looking at, war hoaxing. Thank you for watching. End of video.